A man with nothing, a woman with everything. When a homeless farmer named Jamal Adeyemi meets billionaire Victoria Hale, what happens next will change them both and remind us what real wealth truly is. The rains came like judgment that year, turning the Kafra River into a monster that swallowed everything in its path. Jamal Adeyemi watched from the hillside as the muddy waters claimed his small compound. The three-room house his father had built with his own hands, disappearing beneath the churning brown tide. His wife had died 2 years before from illness, and now the flood took the last physical memory of the life they'd shared together. At 38, Jamal was a man carved from the red earth itself. His shoulders were broad from years of hoisting bags of cassava and yam, his hands calloused from wielding hoes and machetes under the relentless Ghanaian sun. But it wasn't his physical strength that defined him. It was the quiet determination that burned in his chest, the refusal to let hardship break his spirit. When the waters finally receded 3 weeks later, Jamal didn't wait for government aid that might never come. He gathered what little he could salvage and made his way to the abandoned colonial-era farmland on the outskirts of Kumasi City. The British had left the fields to rot decades ago, and now wild grass grew taller than a man. Thorny bushes claiming territory that once produced abundant harvests. Jamal set up a makeshift shelter using zinc sheets and wooden poles. Every morning before dawn, he would wake and begin the backbreaking work of clearing the land. Machete in hand, he carved order from chaos, 1 square meter at a time. The elderly women in the village would shake their heads, wondering why this strong man wasted his energy on land that belonged to no one that would profit him nothing. But Jamal had a different vision. This land may be abandoned, but hunger is not, he would say. He planted cassava, maize, and vegetables, working from sunrise until his muscles screamed for rest. When harvest came, he didn't sell the crops for his own gain. Instead, he distributed them among the widows, the elderly, and families struggling to feed their children. The villagers began to call him Jamal the Generous, though he never sought recognition. His shelter was barely more than a shed with gaps in the walls where wind and rain found easy passage. He owned 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, and sandals held together by wire. At night, he would lie on his thin mat, muscles aching, and wonder if he would ever have a real home again. Some nights, the loneliness was heavier than the bags of grain he carried. He was strong enough to move mountains, yet he felt invisible, forgotten by the world beyond his small corner of existence. Still, every morning he rose with the sun, because the children needed to eat, because the grandmothers depended on him, because even when the world forgets your worth, you don't have to forget it yourself. Oh wow, Jamal lost everything, but still feeds his village while living in a shack. This man's heart is incredible. If this is touching you, smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Enya. Drop a comment. Would you have Jamal's strength? Next shows who's about to notice him, and it will blow your mind. Share this story. Turn on notifications. Victoria Hale stepped out of the black Range Rover, her designer heels sinking slightly into the red earth. She removed her sunglasses and surveyed the landscape with the practiced eye of someone who had built an empire from nothing. At 45, she was one of West Africa's most successful agricultural investors. A woman who had transformed failing farms into profitable enterprises across 6 countries. But success had come with a price. 3 failed engagements to men who loved her money more than her character had left Victoria cautious, guarded. Her late mother's words echoed in her mind. Victoria, don't let bitterness make you blind. The right man will see you, not your bank account. She had almost stopped believing such a man existed. Her team had identified this abandoned colonial farmland as the perfect location for her new agricultural foundation, a project designed to train young farmers in sustainable practices. She'd flown in from Accra that morning to personally inspect the site before making the final decision. Her assistant, Marcus, a lanky young man with a tablet perpetually in hand, walked beside her, reviewing the property details. The land records show it's been in use since 1978, Marcus explained. Government ownership, but they've agreed to lease it to us for the project. The soil quality is actually excellent. Just needs weight. Victoria held up her hand, tilting her head. Do you hear that? A distressed, bleeding cut through the afternoon air, followed by a sound that made Victoria's heart skip. The desperate cries of an animal in pain. Without waiting for her security detail, she hiked up her skirt and ran toward the sound. Marcus scrambling behind her. They found the source in a cleared section of farmland. A massive mahogany tree had fallen, its trunk pinning a young goat whose leg was trapped beneath the enormous weight. The animal's cries were becoming weaker. But what stopped Victoria in her tracks wasn't the goat. It was the man attempting to lift the tree. Jamal had positioned himself at the tree's thickest point. His back pressed against the trunk, legs braced wide. Sweat poured down his face and soaked his faded shirt as he strained with every fiber of his being. The muscles in his neck stood out like cables, his jaw clenched with determination. The tree shifted, rose an inch, then two. Sir, you'll hurt yourself. Marcus called out. We can bring equipment. But Jamal couldn't hear anything except the goat's cries and the roaring in his own ears. With a sound that was part grunt, part prayer, he gave everything he had. The tree lifted higher. Move, he gasped. Someone move it. Victoria didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, designer's skirt forgotten, and pulled the terrified goat free. The moment the animal was clear, Jamal let the tree drop and collapsed to his hands and knees, gasping for air. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Victoria's. Even through his exhaustion, she saw something that made her breath catch. A gentleness that seemed impossible in a man of such obvious physical power. The goat, Jamal wheezed. Is it okay? Victoria examined the animal carefully, bruised, frightened, but alive. Because of you. Jamal stood slowly, and Victoria realized he was even taller than she'd thought. He wiped his face with his forearm and managed a tired smile. It belongs to Mama Amina. She's 85. This goat is like a child to her. Something in Victoria's chest tightened. Here was a man who had nearly broken his back for an elderly woman's goat, who spoke of it with such tenderness. Marcus cleared his throat. Madam, we should. Who are you? Victoria asked, ignoring her assistant. What are you doing here? Jamal gestured at the cleared farmland stretching behind them. I work this land. It feeds the village. He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You work it. Victoria's business mind immediately kicked in. You mean you lease it from the government? Jamal shook his head, looking confused. No one owns it. It was abandoned. I just use it to help people. Marcus pulled Victoria aside, whispering urgently. Madam, technically, he's squatting on government property. We'll need him to vacate before we start the foundation project. Victoria looked back at Jamal, who was now gently examining the goat's leg with hands that could lift trees, but touched with impossible care. She thought of the 3 men who had proposed to her, each one performing elaborate displays of wealth and charm. Not one of them would have ruined their clothes to save an old woman's goat. No, Victoria said firmly. We're not asking him to leave. I want to know everything about this man and what he's doing here. No way. Did a billionaire just get on her knees in the dirt to help? And look at how she's looking at Jamal. If you're excited about where this is going, smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Enya. Drop a comment. Do you think Jamal realizes who Victoria is? Coming up reveals their first real conversation, and it's beautiful. Share this. Turn on notifications. Victoria insisted on visiting Jamal's shelter before returning to her hotel in town. Marcus protested, citing security concerns and schedule conflicts, but one look from his boss silenced him. They walked through the farmland as the afternoon sun painted the sky orange and gold. Jamal leading the way with the rescued goat bleeding happily beside him. The makeshift shelter stood at the edge of the cleared land, humble in a way that made Victoria's throat tight. Jamal had tried to make it presentable, swept the dirt floor clean, arranged his few possessions neatly on a wooden crate that served as furniture. A single pot sat beside a small fire pit. One shirt hung from a nail in the wall, clean but patched. Please sit, Jamal offered, gesturing to the one plastic chair he owned. He remained standing, suddenly self-conscious about his poverty in front of this clearly important woman. Her clothes probably cost more than he'd earned in 8 years. Victoria sat, and Marcus stood guard near the entrance like a disapproving sentinel. She studied Jamal carefully, noting the intelligence in his eyes, the dignity in his bearing despite his circumstances. "Tell me your story," she said softly. At first, Jamal hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about himself, but something about Victoria's genuine interest made the words flow. He told her about the flood, about his late wife, Aisha, about waking up one morning with nothing but his strength and a choice. Become bitter or become useful. "So, you chose to farm abandoned land and give everything away?" Victoria asked, incredulous. "You don't keep anything for yourself?" Jamal shrugged. "I keep enough. I have shelter. I eat the rest. People need it more than I do." He paused, then added quietly, "Besides, when you have nothing, giving makes you feel like you have everything." Those words hit Victoria like a physical force. She thought of her mansion in Accra, her apartment in Dubai, her investment portfolio worth hundreds of millions. She gave to charity, yes, but through foundations and tax-deductible donations. This man gave from his own hunger, from his own need. There was a richness in Jamal's poverty that shamed her wealth. "What's your dream?" she asked. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" Jamal was quiet for a long moment, staring at his calloused hands. "A real home. Land that's legally mine, so I can teach young people to farm to be self-sufficient." Maybe he trailed off looking embarrassed. Maybe what? Maybe a family again someday. Someone to share the harvest with. His voice was so soft, she almost didn't hear it. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd kept locked away after her last heartbreak. She stood abruptly, making a decision that would change both their lives. "Jamal, I'm Victoria Hale. I own Hale Agricultural Ventures. I came here today to build a farming foundation on this land, the land you've been clearing and working." She watched his face carefully. Most men, upon learning of her wealth, transformed before their eyes. Their posture changed, became calculated. They smiled differently, spoke differently, seeing not her, but her bank account. Jamal's reaction was the opposite. He stepped back, literally putting physical distance between them. Something like pain crossed his face. "Then I should leave. This is your land now." "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "That's not what I meant," Victoria interrupted. But Jamal wasn't finished. "A woman like you." He gestured at her, at himself, at the vast gulf between their worlds. "You need someone with a future, someone with something to offer. I'm just a farmer with nothing." The words hung in the humid air between them. Marcus smirked slightly, clearly thinking this was the end of an awkward situation. But Victoria stepped forward, closing the distance Jamal had created. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" she asked, her voice carrying an intensity that made Jamal meet her eyes. "I see a man who lifts fallen trees to save animals that don't belong to him. I see a man who lost everything but chose to give rather than take. I see a man who lives in a shack but feeds a village." She paused, her next words carefully chosen. "I've met men with penthouses and private jets who don't have a fraction of your character. You're the first man I've met whose heart is larger than his muscles." Jamal stared at her speechless. "I don't want you to leave," Victoria continued. "I want to hire you. Be the face of my agricultural foundation. Teach others what you know. Let me provide you with proper land, equipment, resources, not as charity, but because you've already proven you can do more with nothing than most people do with everything." "I can't accept that," Jamal said firmly, though his voice shook slightly. "People would say I'm using you, that I'm after your money." "Let them say it," Victoria replied with a smile that transformed her face. "I've learned that people who matter don't mind, and people who mind don't matter. Besides, this is a job offer, Jamal. You'll work hard for it. I don't do charity. I invest in potential." Marcus stepped forward, finally speaking. "Madam, perhaps we should discuss this back at the hotel. We'll draw up a contract," Victoria continued, ignoring her assistant. "Fair salary, housing, training budget. You'll help design and run the foundation. You'll teach young farmers everything you know." Jamal's mind reeled. It was too much, too fast. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why me?" Victoria's answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. "Because in 15 years of building my company, I've never met anyone who understood what wealth really means. You're the richest poor man I've ever known. Wait, did she just offer him a job and call him the richest poor man? This woman sees what others miss. If this is making your heart race, smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Enya. Drop a comment. Is Jamal going to say yes or let fear win? What happens next shows his decision. And there's a twist. Share this. Turn on notifications. Jamal didn't sleep that night. He lay on his thin mat, staring at the gaps in his zinc roof where stars blinked through, replaying the conversation in his mind. Victoria had left her business card, thick, expensive paper with embossed lettering. She told him to think about the offer and call her tomorrow. The goat he'd rescued slept peacefully outside his shelter. Its leg bandaged with cloth Victoria had torn from her own expensive blouse without hesitation. That detail kept circling in Jamal's mind. She'd ruined designer clothes worth thousands to help an animal, then sat in his dirt-floor shelter without a trace of disgust or condescension. But fear gnawed him like termites in wood. He'd watched wealthy people his whole life. They moved through the world with easy confidence, speaking languages he didn't understand, making decisions that affected thousands. What did he know about running foundations or teaching programs? He could grow cassava and yams, lift heavy things, work until exhaustion, but managing a project, working alongside educated people who would surely see him as the charity case he was. And then there was Victoria herself. The way she'd looked at him really looked at him, seeing past his poverty to something deeper. It terrified and thrilled him equally. His late wife, Aisha, had looked at him that way once. He'd sworn after her death that he'd never risk his heart again. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Morning came too quickly. Jamal forced himself through his routine, washing at the communal well, checking his crops, preparing the day's harvest for distribution. But his hands shook slightly as he worked. And old Mama Amina noticed. "You're troubled," she observed, accepting the basket of vegetables he'd brought her. That woman yesterday, the important one, what did she want? Jamal told her everything. Mama Amina listened quietly, then smiled in the way only the elderly can, carrying wisdom earned through decades of living. "My son," she said gently, "do you know why this goat matters so much to me?" She gestured at the animal, now recovered and eating contentedly. "My daughter gave it to me before she moved to the city, said it would keep me company, give me purpose. I thought it was foolish. I'm too old for goat keeping. But that creature gave me a reason to wake up every morning." She fixed Jamal with a knowing look. Sometimes God sends us things we think we don't need, don't deserve. Our job isn't to understand why. Our job is to receive the gift. Jamal walked back to his shelter, her words heavy in his heart. He picked up Victoria's business card, studied the phone number. His old Nokia phone had just enough credit for one call. His thumb hovered over the buttons. What would Aisha say if she were here? The memory came suddenly, sharp and clear. They'd been in the market years ago, before she got sick. A man had offered Jamal work in the city, good money, but it meant leaving the farm. Jamal had refused immediately, saying he belonged to the soil. Aisha had touched his face and said, "My love, don't confuse loyalty with fear. Staying isn't always courage. Sometimes courage is trusting that your gifts can grow in new soil." Jamal dialed the number. Victoria answered on the second ring. "Jamal, how did you know it was me?" he asked, surprised. "I saved your number when you gave it to me yesterday," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I've been hoping you'd call." "I have conditions," Jamal said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm listening first. I want everything in writing. Clear job description, clear salary. I don't want anyone thinking I'm a kept man or charity case." "Done. What else?" "The foundation has to hire local people, young farmers from the village, people who need real opportunities. And we feed the community while we teach. No one goes hungry while we're building programs." "Absolutely." Victoria agreed. "These are excellent conditions. Anything else?" Jamal took a deep breath. "I need you to understand something. I'm not educated like the people you work with. I'll make mistakes. I'll need time to learn. If you're looking for someone polished and sophisticated, that's not me." There was a pause on the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Jamal, I have a dozen employees with master's degrees who've never grown a single plant. I have advisors with MBAs who couldn't tell cassava from sweet potato. What I need is someone who understands that agriculture isn't a business. It's a relationship with the earth and the people who depend on it. That's you. When do I start? Jamal asked quietly. How about today? My team is still in Kumasi. We'll begin the paperwork, find your proper housing, start planning the foundation structure. Unless you need more time. No, Jamal interrupted. I've wasted enough time being afraid. 3 hours later, Marcus arrived with a car to take Jamal to the hotel where Victoria's team was working. The young man was professionally polite, but his skepticism was obvious. In the plush hotel conference room, Jamal felt massively out of place among the laptops and bottled water and people speaking in acronyms he didn't understand. But then Victoria entered her presence, commanding the room. She sat beside Jamal, not at the head of the table. A subtle message to everyone present. This is Jamal Adeyemi, she announced. He's the heart of this foundation. Everything we design, every program we create runs through him first. If it doesn't serve the farmers he spent years helping, we don't do it. Around the table, expressions range from curiosity to doubt. A middle-aged woman named Patricia, the foundation's proposed director, spoke up. With respect, Ms. Hale, shouldn't we hire someone with agricultural development experience? Perhaps an NGO background. We'll hire those people, too, Victoria replied calmly. But Jamal understands something textbooks can't teach. What it means to farm when everything is against you and why someone would choose to give their harvest away. That perspective is priceless. For the next 6 hours, they worked. Jamal's head spun with terms like sustainability metrics and stakeholder engagement. But when they started discussing actual farming practices and community needs, he came alive. He corrected their assumptions, explained the realities of small-scale farming, described what the village actually needed versus what outsiders thought they needed. Slowly, the skepticism in the room transformed into respect. Even Marcus looked at Jamal differently by the end. As they broke for dinner, Patricia pulled Jamal aside. I apologize for my earlier comment. You clearly know what you're talking about. I think we're going to do something really special here. That night, Victoria insisted on driving Jamal back to his shelter herself, dismissing her security team's protests. You don't have to stay there anymore, she reminded him as they drove through the darkening countryside. We can arrange housing tonight. Tomorrow, Jamal said. I want one more night there to remember where I came from. They sat in silence for a moment outside his shelter. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice soft in the darkness. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance. I'm still afraid, Jamal admitted. Afraid I'll disappoint you. Fear means you care, Victoria replied. It means you understand the weight of what we're building. That's exactly the kind of person I need beside me. The words beside me hung in the air between them, carrying meanings neither was quite ready to name. Oh my goodness, did you hear that? Beside me, she said beside me. This is about to become more than business. If you're screaming right now, smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Inia. Drop a comment. Are you Team Victoria and Jamal? The finale shows what happens next, and it's everything. Share this story. Turn on notifications. 6 months transformed everything. The foundation rose from the abandoned farmland like a promise kept. Modern training facilities stood beside traditional farming plots where Jamal taught young farmers the techniques he perfected through years of hard-won experience. Solar panels powered irrigation systems that made the old colonial-era land bloom again. Government officials who'd ignored the property for decades suddenly appeared for photo opportunities. But the real transformation was in Jamal himself. He stood in front of a classroom of 20 young farmers, his voice confident as he explained crop rotation principles. Gone was the tattered shirt. He now wore the foundation's uniform, though he'd insisted it be practical work clothes, not fancy suits. He'd learned to use computers, to read reports, to speak in meetings with government ministers and international donors. Yet, he remained unchanged in the ways that mattered. Every evening, he still walked through the village, checking on the elderly, ensuring no one went hungry. The foundation's first harvest had been distributed partly as pay for the young farmers they trained, and partly as food for the community's most vulnerable. Some board members had questioned the practice, but Victoria had shut down the debate with one sentence. If we're too business-minded to feed hungry people, we've failed before we've started. Victoria visited the foundation twice a month, though her responsibilities kept her traveling between Accra, Lagos, and international investor meetings. Each visit felt like coming home to something she hadn't known she was missing. She watched Jamal now through the classroom window, noting how the young farmers hung on his every word. He'd earned their respect, not through authority, but through authenticity. He worked beside them in the fields every day, his hands still calloused despite his new position. When the class ended, Jamal found Victoria waiting outside. His face lit up in a way that made her heart skip. "You didn't tell me you were coming today," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Surprise inspections are part of good management," she teased, falling in a step beside him as they walked toward the administrative building. "And what does this inspection reveal?" Jamal asked. "That you're terrible at staying in your office and excellent at everything else." Victoria replied. "Patricia tells me enrollment applications have tripled. We're going to need to expand the facilities." "The young people are hungry to learn," Jamal said. "Not for food, for purpose. They want to know their lives matter. That farming isn't poverty, but possibility." They reached the small garden Jamal had planted beside the office, a quiet space where native flowers bloomed among productive vegetables. It had become their spot where they talked after her visits, where business gradually gave way to something deeper. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, her voice suddenly nervous. Jamal turned to face her, concern in his eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually, and that terrifies me." She took a breath. "Jamal, these 6 months working with you have been the best of my life. Not because of the foundation's success, though I'm proud of that, but because of you, the way you see the world, the way you make me want to be better." Jamal's heart pounded. He'd felt it too, the growing connection that went beyond professional respect. The way her laugh made his whole day better. The way he found himself counting days until her next visit. The way she'd become the person he wanted to share every small victory with. "Victoria," he started, then paused. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Aisha. I told myself it wasn't possible, that I should focus on work, on helping others. But you, I know," she whispered. "I told myself successful women like me don't find real love, that men only see money. But you see me, just me. I see the woman who got on her knees in the dirt to save a goat," Jamal said softly. "I see the person who trusted a poor farmer with her dream. I see someone whose wealth is in her character, not her bank account." They stood close now, the evening sun painting everything gold. Around them, young farmers headed home, calling goodbyes. The smell of fresh earth and growing things filled the air. "I'm still afraid," Jamal admitted. "People will say I'm using you, that I'm not good enough for you." "Let them say it," Victoria replied, echoing her words from their first real conversation. "I've learned that other people's opinions are their problem, not ours." "Are you sure?" Jamal needed to hear it. "You could have anyone, someone from your world with education and polish." Victoria placed her hand over his heart. "This is my world. You show me that real wealth isn't money. It's integrity, kindness, purpose. You're the richest man I know." Jamal covered her hand with his own. "I have nothing fancy to offer you. No romantic speeches or expensive gifts." "Good." Victoria smiled. "I have plenty of expensive things. What I need is a partner who understands what really matters. Someone who will build a life with me, not a lifestyle." "I can do that," Jamal said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can give you my whole heart. It's the most valuable thing I own." "Then I'm the wealthiest woman in the world," Victoria replied. Their first kiss tasted like possibility and promise. Like two people who'd spent their lives feeling not quite enough, finally finding someone who saw them as more than enough. News of their relationship spread quickly. Some gossip blogs called it a scandal. Billionaire falls for her employee. Others spun it as a fairy tale. Jamal's fellow farmers congratulated him with genuine happiness, having watched his loneliness for years. A few foundation board members expressed concerns that Marcus quickly shut down by pointing out that the foundation had never been more successful. 1 year later, they stood together at the foundation's anniversary celebration. Hundreds of young farmers they trained filled the grounds along with village elders, government officials, and international partners. But Jamal's eyes were only for Victoria and hers for him. Patricia gave a speech about the foundation's impact. 500 farmers trained, 8 communities transformed, crop yields increased by 80%. When she called Jamal and Victoria to the stage, the applause was thunderous. But Jamal ignored the prepared remarks. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and the crowd went silent. "A year ago, I was a man who'd forgotten his worth," Jamal said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "I thought I had nothing to offer the world. Then this woman saw value where I saw emptiness. She reminded me that wealth isn't what you have. It's what you give and who you become." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring he'd commissioned from a local craftsman. The band was made from recycled copper, adorned with a single small stone from the Kafra River, the river that had taken his home, but somehow led him here. "Victoria Hale, you are the harvest I never knew I was planning for. Will you marry me?" Victoria's answer was lost in her tears and nodded yes. But the crowd heard it in her kiss, in the way she held Jamal like he was the most precious thing in the world. Because he was. Not because of his strength or his success or his transformation from poor farmer to foundation leader, but because he'd never forgotten how to be human, how to give, how to see value in others, even when the world told him he had none. 2 months later, they married in a ceremony held on the foundation grounds. Mama Amina, the goat he'd saved contentedly grazing nearby, gave Victoria away. Young farmers formed an honor guard with hoes instead of swords. Government ministers sat beside village elders, all barriers of class and wealth dissolving in celebration. In his vows, Jamal promised to always see Victoria's heart before her wealth. In hers, Victoria promised to always remember that true richness means having the courage to give. They built a home together on the foundation grounds, modest by billionaire standards, extraordinary by any measure of love. Their evenings were spent planning expansions, teaching classes, and walking through fields as the sun set over land that had gone from abandoned to abundant. Sometimes late at night, Jamal would wake and watch Victoria sleep, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, from flood victim to husband of one of Africa's most successful women. But that wasn't the real transformation. The real transformation was learning that he'd never lost his worth. It had been there all along, waiting for someone who knew how to see it. And in teaching him to see himself clearly, Victoria had found what she'd been searching for. A man whose wealth was measured in character, whose strength was tempered by gentleness, whose love was as generous as his harvests. The farmer who'd forgotten his worth had finally remembered. And in remembering, he'd helped a billionaire remember, too, that money can buy many things, but it cannot buy the kind of richness found in a good man's heart. They got married, and that ring made from the river that took everything from him. I'm crying. Drop a comment. What did this story teach you about real wealth? Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. Turn on all notifications. Thank you for being part of our folktale family.